Chapter 1434. On the other hand, the railway from the Far East to Eastern Europe wasn't easy to build. It had to pass through the Siberian and Ural regions to reach the Volga region. There were many forests and rivers along the way, which greatly hindered the construction of the railway. For this reason, after Yang Chendong understood the actual situation, he adopted the method of building a bridge when it met a river and digging a hole when it met a mountain. If it was a large mountain, he would take a detour. If it was a small mountain, he would use explosives to flatten it, or dig a hole through which the train could pass through. In these years, Yang Xie's mining work had developed rapidly, and he had the experience and strength to create a cave. Even so, it would take at least a few years to build this railway. Fortunately, Yang Chendong could afford to wait, and what he didn't lack the most now was manpower. Just a moment ago, after the great victory in Oxino City, Jianghu and Wuxing had sent another 100,000 people, and they were all young and strong men. With these people, the construction and development of the railway would be greatly promoted. What he needed to do now was to take advantage of the time before it snowed to build a wider and longer road. Once it snowed, some of the work would have to stop. And the transportation of goods couldn't be stopped. For this reason, Yang Chendong had already arranged for a sleigh. It could easily slide through the snow, even if it was full of goods. This way, he could take advantage of the heavy snow to transport more goods into the city. In this way, he would be able to do what he needed to do at the beginning of spring tomorrow. Because of the upcoming snow, Eastern Europe became quiet. Whether they liked it or not, a tripartite situation had already formed. This was one of Yang Chendong's biggest gains after coming here. Compared to Yang Chendong's gains, the Yarqiang and Tulyafan tribes in the Ili Beli region were officially under Yang Xie's control. The five-star army that was left there had even started a war against Ili Beli. By the time Yang Chendong left, the situation of the war had already become clear, but to everyone's surprise, King Bao Lide of Ili had been so determined that in order to strike at the five-star army, he had betrayed the interests of his own country. He had separately asked for help from the nearby Timur Empire, Kazakh, and Yusang, and had also stated that they would provide the provisions for the army. After defeating the five-star army, the territory would be divided among the four. When Prime Minister Ali Pu was in charge of Ili, he had accumulated a large amount of military supplies for the entire country. Now, they were all being used. The appearance of the four-way army placed considerable pressure on the five-star army. The good thing was that the enemy was already at the end of their rope. Compared to the Yang faction who had a stable rear and a strong economy, they weren't afraid of anyone in a protracted battle. Once the enemy's rations ran out, it would be the time for the five-star army to win the battle. It just so happened that they could take the opportunity to have a good fight with the four-nation coalition. It was not a bad thing to wipe out their vital forces. The war on the land had to stop because of the weather. But the expedition on the sea showed no signs of stopping. After occupying Sri Lanka, the navy had taken Kaji, Giri, Hulunos, and other cities. They had now reached the Persian Gulf, and according to their previous plan, they were building a naval supply base here. This place would become a new and important supply base for the Navy when it went on expeditions all over the world. Equipped with powerful firearms and cannons, they had the world's most elite cold vanguard navy. Wherever the navy with the five-star flag went, they were like dragons entering the sea, unstoppable. In the short span of half a year, the wealth they plundered was equivalent to 120 million taels of silver. The number of slaves they plundered from various countries also reached over 6 million. Currently, they had already been sent back to the headquarters in Crimson City through the supply ships. After so many years, the investment in the navy had never been enough. Now, it was finally time to reap the rewards. When a large amount of gold and silver was sent back to the treasury of Yang Xie, Yu Qian and the rest were all smiles. Now, there were no ministers who would stop the navy from going out to sea. Compared to the wealth in his hands, the change in mindset of the officials made Yang Chendong feel more gratified. Although his authority was not something that could be shaken by the officials, but having people clamoring in his ears every day was not a good thing. This was also one of the reasons why Yang Chendong would rather suffer with the army and risk the dangers of going on expeditions than stay in Kiosk City. He really could not stand the whispers and complaints of the officials every day. However, these people were doing it for his own good. He could not do anything to them, so he could only endure it. And the harvest of the navy could finally make some people shut their mouths. He could finally have some peace and quiet. All in all, the year 1462 was a year of harvest. It was also the year that Yang Xia expanded outwards. In the past, the main focus of the 5-star army was on the grasslands. There were not many gains from fighting there. The other side was so poor that they did not have much wealth. Defeating them would only give them some land and some captives. Compared to the huge expenditure of the army, it felt like they were at a disadvantage. Just like the war with Ely right now, they had invested a lot and gained very little. Because of this, who knew how many officials had already raised their opinions? Even Yu Qian and the rest had vaguely expressed their dissatisfaction. Only then did Yang Chendong decide to expand his army and look for more sources of income. Although expanding his army would suddenly increase the pressure on his finances. But if there were gains, then the benefits would be even greater. Fortunately, it seemed like he had made the right choice. At least the expedition on the sea had a good result. In the next year, after Yang Chendong defeated the Golden Horde, his gains would also be great. At that time, the voices of obstructions would be suppressed to a minimum. Because of the weather, the army had to stop their advance. But in Kiosk City, where it was spring all year round, the impact of winter was limited. The factories continued to operate without interruption. All kinds of products were produced and sent to various places. The 70mm field cannons had already overcome all the difficulties and began to be produced in batches. The problem with the explosive shells was also solved. They could now fire up to 8 li away. This allowed them to successfully replace the 100mm mortars used by the 5-star army, becoming the main artillery of the army. Speaking of which, although the field cannons were easy to move and could be carried by 4 soldiers, compared to the 100mm mortars, they were still slightly heavier. But the army still gave up on the mortars and changed to field cannons. The reason was because the mortars were all from the warehouse. Even the process of making the shells was very troublesome. With Yang Xia's technology, it was impossible to make such a good thing. They had been imitating it all along. It was like a primary school student suddenly learning middle school and high school knowledge. It was very difficult to learn, but it was not a problem for him to copy the answers. But this was not the way to go in the long run. After dismantling the cannons in the warehouse countless times and copying them, the field cannons were finally produced. Because they were self-made by Yang Xia, all the parts were complete. With all the parts, the number of cannons continued to increase. Finally, it was time to equip the entire army. Although there was still a long way to go before it could be used at will, the production cost of the explosive shells wasn't low, and the production time was not short. However, with the continuous improvement of the steam engine technology, the replacement would be faster and faster. One day, all the complicated problems would be simplified. By then, the production cost of the explosive shells would be infinitely reduced, and the 5-star army would really be invincible in the world. A large number of field cannons were produced and shipped to various battlefields. In the warehouse of Kazan City, there was a row of 20 cannons that had just been shipped over. The distance of a few thousand li took these cannons a few months to arrive in front of Yang Chendong. He gently touched these cold field cannons and was very emotional. These were independent cannons made by the Yang Xia munitions factory. Their appearance was enough to prove that their efforts over the years were not in vain. Their technology was finally effective and he no longer needed to rely on the warehouse. There were still many advanced weapons in the warehouse, but Yang Chendong rarely used them. If a country wanted to develop, it was impossible to rely on one person. Not to mention that his goal was the entire world. If he relied on himself, he could survive, but what about the future? After all, he couldn't allow the Hans to fall again just because he left, right? Right now, saving himself was what he had been doing. For the research department led by Feng Ku, Yang Chendong had always given them the best treatment and the best policies. Whatever they wanted to know, whatever they needed to know, he taught them without holding back. The only thing left was to open their heads and directly put things inside. Because of this, who knows how many people were jealous and raised doubts, but they were all suppressed by his words that carried enormous weight. Finally, his efforts paid off and Yang Chendong could finally let out a sigh of relief. In the past, he only relied on his personal authority to promote policies and methods, but now that more and more people understood what he was doing, there was no need to explain anything to them. Young master, these field cannons are too ugly. Beta Persei, who did not know what Yang Chendong was thinking, also touched the field cannon and even lifted it up to feel its bulkiness. He then shook his head and said with some dissatisfaction, "What do you know?" Yang Chendong snorted coldly. He was very disdainful of Beta Persei's short-sightedness. This was a self-produced product that belonged to the modern era. Mortars were things in the warehouse and belonged to artillery hundreds of years later. How could they be compared? Chapter 1435. Why don't I understand? Beta Persei seemed to be a little anxious. He was afraid that Yang Chendong would look down on him, so he added, "Young master, this field artillery is not as good as mortars in terms of size, range, and power. But its shells are cheap. With this kind of artillery, you can fire shells at will. How can this be compared to mortars?" Yang Chendong snorted. With just one sentence, Beta Persei was instantly speechless. The lack of artillery shells had always been one of the main factors restricting the development and growth of the five-star army. Usually, unless it was necessary, the five-star army would not use mortars in battle. Even if they did use mortars, there would be a limit to the number of shells they could fire. They would have to calculate the number of shells they could fire, which gave people a very uncomfortable feeling. For this reason, some people in the army also raised questions. Why couldn't they prepare more shells for war? In response to this question, Yang Chendong directly suppressed it by saying that the cost of shells was too high. Fortunately, researchers would not have any connection with the army. This was also one of Yang Chendong's strategies to govern the place. The army was only responsible for war, the civil servants were only responsible for governing the place, and the scientific researchers were only responsible for development and research. The parties could not have any horizontal connection, which made the other departments very mysterious in the eyes of the people in the department. So this answer blocked a lot of people's mouths. Now, with the appearance of the field artillery, Yang Chendong did not have to find so many excuses to explain the origin of the artillery in the future. And when he said that they could use shells at will, Beta Persei immediately became very excited. "Young master, can we really fire at will?" Not at will, but the number of shells is always higher than mortars. Oh, by the way, the officials in South City just reported that the greenhouse there is ready for harvest. You can take some people to take a look. Yang Chendong was afraid that Yang Heir would raise the idea of casually firing cannonballs, so he would try firing 2 cannonballs first. Yang Chendong sent him away with one sentence. After Beta Persei left, Yang Chendong also had some peace. Then he looked at Qiu Vi, the captain of the Black Cavalry, and said, "Send a message to Cheng City and let them transport more shells. After spring, we will let the enemy know that in the face of our 5-star army, they don't even have the qualifications to fight back." The weather was getting colder and colder, and Eastern Europe was covered in snow. In the past, this time was the most difficult time for the people. Many people would even freeze or starve to death because of the cold weather and lack of food. But with the arrival of the 5-star army, everything changed. A large amount of food transported through the 3 eastern provinces made the people no longer starving. Although it was not enough to completely fill their stomachs with 3 meals a day, it was not a problem to have 2 meals a day. In particular, the harvest of the greenhouse allowed more green vegetables to appear in the city. This was something that no one dared to dream about. Now, it had actually been realized. Many people knelt on the ground and sighed at the superb magic of King Wunan of Daimiang. At the same time, they were even more determined to follow him. Many people were already prepared to work hard after spring to earn more Chinese coins. In this way, they could buy more food in the coming winter and say goodbye to the days of hunger and cold. A large number of potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and other seeds were sent to the warehouse. With these high-yielding seeds, Yang Chendong believed that next year would be a bumper harvest. From then on, the people here would not only say goodbye to the life of not having enough to eat, but also become a new food base in the future. It would become a bridgehead from here to the European mainland, and become another existence like the first city. This winter quietly passed by under the expectations of the people. In the 3rd month of the year 1493, the weather began to warm up. After the snow began to melt, the 4 cities with the smell of Yangxia shone with a new youth. Countless people walked out of their homes and went out of the city to build roads. For them, having something to do and earning Chinese coins was the best life. In the 3rd month, the snow on the roads began to melt. The soldiers were also in high spirits and prepared to go to war. Among them, the tens of thousands of new soldiers were the most excited. This winter, they were able to bask in the glory of being part of the 5-star army. They were able to wear thick and warm military coats. Some of the officers who had performed well were even given black down jackets. When they wore these clothes, they were no longer afraid in the cold weather. For a period of time, the matter of a down jacket being exchanged for a wife was happening among the people. Unexpectedly, there was a great tendency that the supply could not meet the demand. This was something that Yang Chendong did not expect. However, in this era of poverty, where human life was the most worthless, it really happened. Yang Chendong did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard this. However, this also showed that Yang Xia's items were very popular. The story of a down jacket being exchanged for a wife spread in the army. This made many new soldiers who could not find a wife excited. They also longed for an opportunity to get a down jacket. Under the stimulation of material goods, the morale of the army was very high. Yang Chendong knew that it was time to take the initiative. With 30,000 veterans of the new Second Army as the main force, 60,000 new soldiers of the White Russian Division as the support, and the 3 main regiments of the 2nd Division of the 2nd Cold Front Army, an artillery battalion, and an Air Force division, a total of 120,000 people left Kazan City in the middle of March and went straight to the nearest city, Samara. Yes, the Air Force also came. Major General Tianyu, the commander of the Air Force, came to Eastern Europe with Sun Lixing, the commander of the 1st Division, to report to Yang Chendong. The 5-star army had 3 main forces, sea, land, and air. However, in reality, the Air Force was often ignored. They had the least number of people, and the hot air balloons under their control also needed the cooperation of the weather. This made them unable to display their original strength on the battlefield, so they could not be counted on in many wars. Seeing the army eating meat and expanding the territory, the navy also began to move and began to rampage on the sea, attacking cities and seizing land. The supreme commander of the Air Force, Major General Tianyu, finally could not hold back. He begged Feng Ku, the first engineer of the Science and Technology Research Institute, and even borrowed a science and technology development team from him at the risk of being impeached. Under the efforts of this team, not only was the direction problem of the hot air balloon solved, but they also created a hydrogen balloon that flew higher than the original one. On the modified hot air balloon, a steam engine was added. After changing the power source, it ensured that they could fly however they wanted in the air and fly wherever they wanted. They did not need to rely on the wind to move forward. They could stay in the air for a full 24 hours, which was enough to deal with the general needs of the war. After the improvement, the commander of the Tianyu army continuously reported to Yang Chendong, requesting to go out and fight. In the end, he got such an opportunity to perform. At that moment, he traveled tens of thousands of li, first arriving at the 3 eastern provinces on a ship from Crimson City, then to the Far East region, and then to Siberia. Even during the new year, he spent it on the road. Finally, a week ago, he arrived at Kazan City, just in time for the attack plan. In order to verify that Tianyu's words were not exaggerated, Yang Chendong first watched his performance in the air. After seeing that he indeed had the ability to shoot wherever he wanted, he waved his hand and agreed to let him participate in the military plan to attack the Golden Horde. With the cooperation of the Air Force and the 275mm field cannons that were delivered in several batches, Yang Chendong led his army of 120,000 confidently out of Kazan City and headed straight for Samara City. These 120,000 people were just the first echelon. Behind him, there was a newly built second division of the White Russia, with 60,000 members. After the 5-star Army's main force attacked the city, they would be responsible for logistics, battlefield cleaning, and prisoner guarding. The commander of the 2nd Division was Nikolaev. From the first generation's temporary commander to the commander of the 2nd Division, Nikolaev was noble and took the initiative to let Huri be the commander of the 1st Division. In his words, Huri was once a great Khan, and knew how to manage an army better than he did. Nikolaev's modesty, in Yang Chendong's eyes, made him very satisfied. From his observation these days, this person's learning ability was very strong, and most importantly, he was very loyal. He never thought of himself as a White Russian, on the contrary, he applied to become a Han citizen several times. He even said in front of everyone that a person's origin could not be changed, and all he could do was to become a qualified Han citizen through his own efforts. Such a loyal person, and also a talent, Yang Chendong of course had no reason to let him go. With a wave of the pen, he agreed to his request to become a Han citizen, and gave him the position of commander of the 2nd Division. He also left a battalion of the new 2nd Army to be responsible for his safety. In the end, it was also to monitor him. Yang Chendong would never easily trust a person of another race. Even if he trusted that the other party would not do anything to betray him, he still had to take the necessary measures. After temporarily handing over the matters of the rear to Nikolaev, Yang Chendong led the 120,000 troops out of the city and headed south. As soon as he moved, the scouts of the Golden Horde, who had been watching his movements, immediately reacted and reported the matter to the Great Khan. In the Golden Horde, Mahama summoned the generals to discuss how to deal with the 5-star army. Since they did not know the strength of the 5-star army, all the generals had a relaxed look on their faces. Especially the ferocious Muhammad, who had a look of disdain as he said, "These Hans are really looking for death. We did not go look for them, but they came to seek their own deaths. Great Khan, I will ask 50,000 elite cavalry to hunt outside Samara and capture these 2-footed sheep as slaves." Chapter 1436. Hearing Muhammad's words, all the generals present burst into laughter. To them, the Han people were still as weak as they had been in the past. They only knew how to open their mouths and act like scholars. For such people, not to mention 120,000, even if it was 1.2 million, what was there to be afraid of? All right, this Khan approves. Mahama also had a smile on his face. He believed that as long as Muhammad made a move, he would teach the Han people how to behave. In this world, he would always be the boss, and could only be him. Originally, he was still thinking about how to deal with these Han people. If the other party only hid in the city and did not come out, it would be a headache. The 130,000 people that Gray led suddenly disappeared last year was proof of this. Now that the other party had come out of the city, it was equivalent to a tortoise crawling out of its shell. What was there to be afraid of? The cavalry on the grasslands would hunt, and this was what the Mongolian cavalry was best at. Mahama, who had originally treated the five-star army as his greatest enemy, suddenly realized that he had overestimated the other party. At this moment, his number one enemy was the blind Duke of Ross. He even thought that after defeating the Han people, he should let them be the vanguard to counterattack the White Russians. Perhaps it would be time for him to reunite this place. The generals of the Golden Horde all looked down on the Han army, but to Yuan, who was guarding Samara, he did not have the slightest intention of looking down on them. Especially when he saw the 120,000 Han soldiers coming from outside the city, there was only caution on his face. It was said that one could see the whole leopard from a single spot, and see the overall situation from a corner. As someone who had led troops for many years, Yuan could feel that the Han army was not to be trifled with from the other party's formation. From afar, the Han army 5 miles away was dressed in uniform, and their soldiers' faces were filled with fighting spirit and killing intent. Yuan was not a famous general of the Golden Horde, but he had been in the army for many years, and he believed that his eyesight was not bad. After seeing the neat formation of the Han army, he knew that this was not an easy army to deal with. Since last year, he had been appointed as the general of Samara city by the Great Khan, in order to prevent the Han people from suddenly crossing this place and appearing at the foot of Sarai city. In other words, his mission did not require him to take the initiative to attack whenever he saw the Han people. He only needed to defend Samara and not lose it. Orders: close the city gates. Everyone is to stand guard on the city walls. Without orders, no one is to attack. After giving up on the idea of clashing with the Han people outside the city, Yuan gave the order to guard the city. Relying on the sturdiness of the city walls, the 20,000 Mongol soldiers and 30,000 slave soldiers looked at the Han Chinese troops with mocking gazes, as if saying, "Come and attack if you have the ability." Humph, truly shameless. The face of the Mongolian warriors has been thrown away by these people. The sergeant put down the binoculars in his hand as he rode on his horse. His face was a little red, but no one knew whether it was because of his anger or because of the wind. Once upon a time, the Mongol cavalry ruled the world and were invincible. They had always been the ones attacking. When had they ever seen them defending the city? But now, the tables had turned. It was their turn to guard the city like cowards and not come out, and they still had the face to laugh at others. No matter what, Yuan was half Mongol. More importantly, he had lived on the grasslands since he was a child. Relatively speaking, he was more like a Mongol than a Han. It was because of this that he had such a strong sense of immersion and looked down on the performance of these Mongol people. Beta Persei, who was also riding a horse, saw Yuan's angry snort. He chuckled. It was rare to see Yuan, who was wise and did not show his emotions, so angry. He felt that it was a little funny, but he was more excited about the upcoming siege. He thought that it was time for the field artillery to show its power. He heard that in this winter, a lot of artillery shells had been shipped. If they could fire enough, he would not be able to resist. After laughing, he looked at Yang Chendong with a pleading gaze. "Young master, the artillery, go, go." Yang Chendong seemed to have known that Beta Persei would make a request. Unlike the other generals, this man had always been busy following him around. Sometimes, it was inevitable that he would lose some freedom. This time, he would give the command of the artillery to him. It could be considered a form of compensation. Understood, Beta Persei responded loudly as if he had become a different person. Then, he turned his horse and left. The last time he asked Yang Chendong, he had a chance to fight Gray one-on-one. Now, he asked him again, and he got the chance to command the artillery. He felt that the young master was really good to him. Of course, he would not go overboard. He still had a sense of propriety. He knew when to speak, what kind of things he could participate in, and what kind of things he could not touch. Speaking of Gray, he was riding a horse not far behind Yang Chendong. After he was defeated by Beta Persei fair and square, he joined the 5-star army as a captive. Because they were going to deal with the Golden Horde this time, they needed someone who understood the other party very well. Therefore, Yang Chendong ordered him to follow the main army. Now that he saw that the city gates of Samara were tightly shut, as if they were facing a great enemy, he waved his hand behind him and said to Gray, "You must have seen the power of our cannons. What do you think will happen if the cannons hit the city walls? The city gate will definitely be broken. The Mongolian soldiers are no match for them." Gray, who had seen the power of the field artillery, said without hesitation. He wasn't trying to flatter anyone, but he had seen the field artillery test firing and had seen the terrifying destructive power. Thinking about that scene now made his legs go weak. In the past, when they fought with the Russians, they had suffered losses from the enemy's artillery. Now, the field artillery of the 5-star army was many times more powerful than that of the Russian army. It would be strange if the Mongolian soldiers could win. Yang Chendong nodded. "Since you know what will happen, are you willing to persuade them to surrender so that your brothers will suffer less and die less?" "I am willing." Gray nodded heavily. To him, persuading them to surrender was not something shameful. On the contrary, he was living for them. It could be imagined that when 200 cannons fired at the same time, it would not take long for the city walls of Samara to collapse. At that time, everyone would probably die. This kind of death was different from cavalry warriors dying on the battlefield. They would lose their lives in vain. Gray wanted to save as many people as possible, so he was willing to persuade them to surrender. After receiving the order, Gray held a scepter in his right hand, which was the token of an emissary. He rode his horse and rushed toward Samara. Only when he was 80 meters away did he stop. In the next moment, a loud shout rang out, "I am Gray, the ambassador of the 5-star army. May I know which general is in charge of defending the city?" "It's Gray." "He's not dead?" There were many of Gray's former colleagues on the city wall. They quickly recognized the person below the city wall. At that moment, the general guarding the city, Yuan, was standing on the city wall. When he saw Gray's arrival, he was surprised at first. Then, he said angrily, "He has indeed surrendered to the Han army. He is a disgrace to us Mongolian warriors. Which general is in charge of guarding the city? Please step forward and speak." Gray could not hear what the people on the city wall were talking about, but he still shouted loudly. "It's me, the cowardly Gray. Do you still recognize me?" Yuan, who was dressed in armor, stepped forward. Then, he looked at Gray below the city wall and shouted loudly. Gray's eyesight wasn't bad. Despite being 80 meters away, he was still able to recognize the identity of this person. Upon seeing that it was Yuan who was guarding this place, a few traces of excitement appeared in his voice as he shouted out, "So it's brother Yuan. Coward Gray. Even after suffering such a loss, I still treated you as a brave warrior, and even burned incense for you every day. Who would have thought that you would actually surrender to the Han people? Do you know what the word shame means?" Just as he was about to explode with anger, Yuan shouted out loudly, or rather, questioned Gray. "Brother Yuan, you are wrong. It's not that I want to surrender to the Han army. It's just that their firepower is too strong. We are no match for them. Brother Yuan, I advise you to open the city gate and surrender to the 5-star army. You are no match for them. Furthermore, the Great Khan has arranged for you to be here. It's obvious that he wants you to be a shield. We can't be rash and lose the lives of our brothers." Gray's relationship with Yuan was very good. Otherwise, Yuan would not have burned incense for him every day. Because of this, he felt that it was even more important to persuade Yuan to open the city gate and surrender. Only then would he be able to survive. He had not seen the power of the 5-star army and still treated Yang Chendong's army as the cowardly two-legged sheep army of the Han army. How could Yuan surrender without a fight? He knew that the Great Khan had arranged for him to be in Samara city and that he was being used. However, as a Mongolian warrior, he should not be afraid of sacrifice or death. Furthermore, wasn't this using him to prove that he was still useful? This was a good job that some warriors were envious of but could not obtain. Yuan, who had made up his mind to defend Samara city to the death and give the Han army a taste of their own medicine, would not give up on defending the city just because of a few words from Gray. Yuan gave a cold snort as he received a powerful crossbow from one of his bodyguards. Pulling the bowstring, he released an arrow, sending an arrow flying 10 steps in front of Gray. Gray! Gray's eyes widened as he looked at Yuan. Gray's eyes widened in shock. Gray, you coward! From now on, we have nothing to do with each other. If you continue to stir up the morale of the troops here, the next arrow will be shot into your chest. Scram! Yuan was furious as he shouted out emotionlessly. It was impossible for the furious Yuan to listen to any words or advice. Therefore, Gray knew that he wouldn't be able to complete his mission. He was also clear about Yuan's temper. If he didn't leave, the other party would really do as he said, and could really kill him with a single arrow. After shaking his head and sighing helplessly, Gray turned his horse back. However, even so, he did not forget to turn around and shout at the city wall, "Brothers, remember my words. If you can't hold on, come out with the white flag. At that time, I will be able to save your lives." Chapter 1437. After saying those words, Gray did not hesitate any longer. He turned around and walked toward the 5-star army camp behind him. He had said what he needed to say. Now, it was time to show his true strength. Gray returned without achieving anything. Yang Chendong saw this scene. He also knew that some enemies were stubborn. If he did not show them some power, they would not listen to him. Pass down the order. Aim the cannons and fire with all your might. Ba Daojiang took Beta Persei's place and shouted loudly, "The king has given the order. Prepare the cannons and fire." After the military order was given, Beta Persei, who was already standing with the artillery battalion, laughed heartily when he heard it. Just now, he was really worried that Gray would succeed in persuading them to surrender. If that was the case, wouldn't he be useless? Now, it was finally time to show off. He immediately said to Lin Luan, the commander of the artillery battalion of the 2nd Cold Front Division, "Battalion Commander Lin, the next step will depend on our performance. In a while, you and I will each take a cannon. Let's see who can shoot more accurately, okay?" "Okay, but I've won." "Second brother, please don't give me a hard time." Lin Luan also laughed happily. In terms of other things, he might not be a match for Beta Persei, the favorite of the 6th young master, but in terms of accuracy, he was not afraid of anyone. "It's all true. Second brother, I am not a person who can afford to lose. It's just that we haven't started yet. Who knows who will win or lose?" Ha ha ha. Beta Persei also laughed heroically. Then, he walked in front of a cannon and took the initiative to take on the role of the cannoneer. Everything was ready. Beta Persei put a burst shell into the field cannon. With a loud bang, the bombardment of Samara city officially began. The sound of the cannons rumbled like thunder from the heavens. The loud explosions shook one's soul. With each explosion, a cannonball would fly towards the walls of Samara with a deafening roar. Boom! At the same time, a huge hole was left on the city walls, and the cannonballs exploded. Countless metal shards and steel nails flew in all directions, landing on the Mongolian soldiers around them, and waves of anguished cries rang out. Blossom bullets were not comparable to solid bullets. The latter could only hit a path, while the former could deal secondary damage. Since they were not prepared and did not expect the 5-star army's cannons to be able to hit so far away, their power was also so strong. With just the first round of cannon fire, thousands of Mongolian soldiers were hit and fell to the ground. With 200 cannons, even if each cannonball only injured 5 people, it would still be enough to wipe out 1,000 enemies. In fact, the power of one shot was not limited to this. If the shot was accurate and landed in the midst of the enemy soldiers, it could injure dozens or even hundreds of people. The cannons continued to fire. One of the benefits of the field artillery was that the cost of the artillery shells was reduced, so they could be used more often. The destructive power of the artillery shells would accumulate, and the damage would be greater. Under the continuous cannon fire, the city walls of Samara city looked like hell on earth. More and more Mongolian soldiers fell to the ground, and more injured soldiers appeared. The morale of the soldiers also became lower and lower under the continuous cannon fire. Under the protection of a group of personal guards, Yuan was pressed to the ground and could not move at all. In just a short quarter of an hour, he had witnessed with his own eyes the scene of many brave warriors being killed by the cannons. Those were all warriors who were skilled in archery and horse riding. If they were given a warhorse and galloped on the grasslands, even 3 to 5 Han soldiers would not be their match. But now, they had died on the city walls in such a sullen manner. This made him feel very uncomfortable. He could not continue to wait like this. He had to take the initiative to attack. Even if he lost the city, it was better than dying in such a cowardly manner. There was a voice shouting in his heart. Yuan didn't know where he got the strength from, but he suddenly pushed off the bodyguards who were on top of him. He shouted loudly, "Warriors, follow this general downstairs. We will ride our warhorses and charge out. Even if we die, we will die on the charge. That's right, we must let the Han know our strength." Some of the Mongolian soldiers who could not stand waiting passively to die also shouted out. After the news spread, more and more Mongolian warriors ran down the city walls and found their war horses. They were prepared to charge out and fight. Stop. In the 5-star Army's central tent. Yang Chendong put down the binoculars in his hands and raised his right hand. At that moment, the battlefield, which was still filled with the sound of cannons, quickly regained its calmness. The sudden silence made some people feel uncomfortable. Just when everyone did not know what had happened, the tightly shut gates of Samara city suddenly opened from the inside. Following that, a large number of Mongolian cavalry surged out. They did not even wait to get into formation and charged towards the 5-star Army's main camp. Yang Chendong had noticed that there were no longer any Mongolian soldiers on the city walls, which was why he had stopped the cannon fire. Now, it seemed like he had saved a lot of cannons. However, since the Mongolian soldiers wanted to use cavalry to charge at him, they would have to pay the price for underestimating him. 6th Young Master, New Second Army requests for battle. My king, White Russia requests for battle. Shibi and Ahuli cupped their fists and walked out. After sweeping his gaze across the two of them, Yang Chendong's gaze landed on the former commander of Ling Feng's 2nd Division, Xiao Feng. I'll leave this battle to Ling Feng. Do not disappoint. Yes, 6th Young Master, don't worry. Xiao Feng chuckled and looked at Shibi and Ahuli with a provocative gaze. He then rode his horse forward and arrived in front of Ling Feng's 2 divisions, who had already gotten into formation and were ready to attack. 6th Young Master has given the order. It's time for us to perform. Remember, hit hard. This is a live target practice. We have to record the results later. There were no words of encouragement. Just the words of recording the results made all the soldiers of Ling Feng's expression turn serious. Ling Feng's treatment was the best in the entire 5-star Army, and they were respected. But at the same time, due to the limited number of spots, if he wanted to secure this position and not be coveted by others, he would need to perform better. The battlefield test was one of the most important criteria. If they performed well, it would not be hard for them to be promoted to officer. If they did not perform well, there were cases of officers being demoted to soldier. It was time to get serious. All the soldiers checked their equipment seriously. Once they did all that, the Mongolian cavaliers across them were only 1 mile away from them. At this moment, Yuan, who was leading the charge, had a smile on his face. Originally, he was already prepared to die. He was also prepared to be bombarded the moment he left the city. If that happened, the formation of his cavalry would be messed up. After all, war horses were extremely afraid of the sound of cannons. He thought that under the sound of the cannons, there would be less than 20% of the soldiers who could charge to the front. However, no one dared to stop them. Could it be that the Han army is afraid? If he knew that this would happen, he would not have needed to defend the city. He would have just led his troops to charge out. That way, the thousands of brothers who had died on the city walls would be a huge fighting force. He sighed and thought that he had overestimated the Han army. At this moment, he only wanted to charge into the Han camp and start a crazy massacre. For this, he continued to spur the war horse under him. Its speed became faster and faster, and they were getting closer and closer to the sandbag formation of the Lengfeng 2 Division. 300 steps, fire. Standing beside the group of warriors, Xiao Feng held a Type 95 handgun and shouted loudly. He took the lead to aim the gun at the Mongolian cavalry general Yuan, who was charging over. As the saying goes, soldier against soldier, general against general. This time, Xiao Feng's target was Yuan. Following the sound of the gunshot, the bullet shot out rapidly, heading straight for Yuan, who was brandishing his saber. Completely unaware of the approaching danger, Yuan, who was still brandishing his large blade, felt his body sink. It was as if something had drilled into his body. Following which, all the strength in his body started to drain away. Relying on inertia, he continued to charge forward for another 10 meters. Finally, all the strength in his body was used up. His hands no longer had the strength to hold onto the reins of the horse. His body swayed and fell off the horse. A shot to the heart. Yuan's death could be considered a quick one. Just like how the Han people faced the invasion of other races, the Mongols had General Gray who knew the situation and was afraid of death. There was also General Yuan who would rather die than submit. This was human nature. It was because everyone's human nature was different that it created such a colorful society. Along with Yuan, there were also hundreds and thousands of Mongol cavalry soldiers. They were all hit by the high-speed bullets while they were moving, causing them to fall off their horses one by one. This scene was just the beginning. As more and more Mongol cavalry soldiers charged forward, more and more people died in the path of the charge. They became ghosts under the spears and went to meet the longevity god that they believed in. Gunshots continued to ring out. No one knew how many waves of bullets were fired. When the battlefield was filled with ownerless warhorses, the Mongol cavalry finally felt fear. There was a limit to a person's courage. When the scene of death appeared in front of them, they might be able to hold on for a while. However, they definitely could not say that they were not afraid. When they saw countless of their comrades mysteriously dying on their horses and not a single one of them being able to charge within 50 meters of the Han army, a feeling of being unable to see any hope filled their entire bodies. At this moment, the fear that was forcefully suppressed continued to surge forth. In the end, it became a sign of collapse. The generals have all died in battle. We can't charge forward. Let's retreat. No one knew who was the first to shout out those words. Following which, the group of Mongol cavalry instinctively urged their horses to turn around. However, it was at this moment that the cannon fire that had stopped started once again. However, this time, the cannon fire was not aimed at the city walls. Instead, it was aimed at their escape route. Chapter 1438. Since they had already escaped, how could the 5-star army allow them to escape back into the city? Cavalry charge. Yang Qindong rode the white dragon and looked at everything that was happening in front of him indifferently. Everything was going according to plan. Ahuli, the Mongolian cavalry division commander who had been waiting for orders, could not wait any longer. Then, he shouted, "All cavalry, listen to my order. Charge!" A total of 60,000 reorganized Mongolian soldiers charged out under the lead of Ahuli, giving off a shocking aura. 60,000 against less than 10,000 Golden Horde cavalry was a bit of a bully. However, there was no difference between strong and weak on the battlefield, only victory and defeat. No one would not beat you just because you were weak. On the contrary, the weaker you were, the more likely you were to be bullied. Sending out all the Mongolian cavalry at once was a way to train them. From Yang Qindong's point of view, when two armies fought, the first thing to do was to show their spirit. If they did not even have the courage to fight, then they would have already lost. And where did confidence come from? It came from the accumulation of victory after victory. What he was doing now was to accumulate the fighting spirit of the soldiers. This was also the path that new recruits had to take to become veterans. How could soldiers who had never been on the battlefield be called veterans? 60,000 against less than 10,000 people, and 10,000 people who were already scared out of their wits, the result was obvious. Many of the Mongolian cavalry did not even have the chance to attack before news of victory came from the front. The enemy either died or surrendered. Fortunately, there were still 30,000 slave soldiers in Samara. Although their fighting strength was average, wasn't it a good opportunity for the Mongolian cavalry to train? Advance, into the city. Seeing that the situation was settled, Yang Qindong shouted and led the army toward Samara, which was 5 miles away. No one expected the city to be conquered so quickly. None of the items in the city were damaged, which made the takeover of the city much smoother. The 30,000 slave soldiers in the city and less than 50,000 common people, men and women, old and young, became a kind of property. They were all brought out of the city and towards Kazan city. Another 50,000 non-human civilians, most of whom were from the Wa province, moved into Samara city. Every time they occupied a piece of land, they would move the people away and let other people occupy the land. This was the wondrous method under Yang Qindong's rule. It was also a path that was thought to be untrodden since ancient times. After all, no one was willing to leave their home unless they had nowhere else to go. In this regard, Yang Qindong had issued a strict order. In order to completely solve the rebellion of the non-ethnic people under his rule, and to prevent someone from causing trouble behind his back when he led the army out to battle, he implemented the method of migration of non-ethnic people whenever he arrived at a place. In this way, the initial investment was rather large, and it even required a lot of money, but the results were good. At least for more than 10 years, there had not been any major riots in any place. The people were not from the same place, so it was difficult to unify the people. Those who opposed would eventually be unable to realize their ideas because they did not have enough rallying power. They were destined to be cleansed by time, and finally become true Han people. The migration and pacification of the people in the Golden Horde was handed over to Commander Shibi. After Yang Qindong's observation, he found that this person had the ability to govern a place. He was a man of many talents in both civil and military affairs. Yang Qindong wanted to cultivate his ability to govern and planned to hand over this territory to him when he left this place. Shibei was a talent that Yang Qindong had discovered early on. Although he had surrendered to Yang Qindong and had once pretended to surrender to Northern Ming in order to survive, he was still very loyal to Yang Qindong. After several investigations, Yang Qindong had already come to a conclusion. Since that was the case, it was only right that he be given space to develop. He did not pay attention to the affairs in the city. Naturally, there would be someone else to take care of it. What Yang Qindong needed to do now was to lead the army straight to Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde. At this time, the news of Samara's capture had reached Sarai. When he heard the news, General Muhammad was still reorganizing his army and had not yet left the city. When the news came, he was shocked. He secretly cursed Yushan's stupidity. 20,000 cavalrymen and 30,000 slave soldiers. How could the city be captured in just one day? What a bunch of trash. Although he was puzzled, he had to speed up his army and prepare to meet the 5-star army at Sarai. Not only was Muhammad caught off guard, but Great Khan Muhammad also did not expect the city to be captured so quickly. When he learned that the Han army was only 200 miles away from Xinjing and could arrive in 3 days, he gave several orders to the surrounding Mongolian tribes to gather their troops outside the city. The sudden fall of Samarra put the Golden Horde in a passive position. But even at this time, not many people thought highly of the 5-star army. In their eyes, sheep were sheep. Even if they were given sharp weapons to kill wolves, they would still be no match for a pack of wolves. Army, continue to speed up. Put down the unimportant things first and leave them for the transport team behind. Yang Qindong knew that speed was the most important thing in war. Using speed to defeat slowness was his forward strategy for this military operation. The Golden Horde had ruled here for more than 200 years. There were countless surrounding tribes that had submitted to them. If they were all gathered together, their military strength could reach a terrifying 1 million. At that time, even if Yang Qindong had the field artillery, it would take a long time to conquer these people. The price he would have to pay would be unknown. The best way to solve this problem was to suddenly appear in front of the enemy before they fully recovered and take down Sarai. They would occupy the Holy Land in the eyes of the Mongolians and destroy their fighting spirit. Most importantly, only by catching the enemy off guard could they not give them the chance and time to move their belongings. The cost of this operation was not small. He was counting on the wealth that the Golden Horde had accumulated over the past 200 years to subsidize the military supplies. They left behind all the equipment that they did not need for the time being. 20,000 of the 120,000 soldiers were left behind to cover the retreat, while the other 100,000 rushed toward Sarai. They had originally planned to arrive in 3 days, but they only used 1.5 days to arrive. When noon arrived, the 5-star Legion Corps appeared outside the city, causing the Mongol soldiers on the city walls to scream out loud. No one had expected the Han army to appear in front of them so quickly. Luckily, the Mongolian soldiers were standing on the city walls, which gave them a sense of security. Like the Han people, the Golden Horde had holed themselves up in the city. They would only go out during the grazing season. This way, they were much safer. However, they did not know that this was equivalent to killing their fighting spirit. The news of the Han army's appearance quickly spread into the city. When the city gates were closed, all the Mongol nobles in the city knew about this matter. Some of their faces became flustered, and the city became noisy because of this. The fact that Samarra was taken so quickly proved that the Han army was strong and terrifying. It seemed like there was going to be a bloody battle. Even so, no one thought that the Han army would be able to take down Sarai. After all, this was the capital of the Golden Horde. Just the elite cavalry alone numbered more than 300,000. This did not include the troops from the other tribes that could come in a short period of time. It was said that the Han army only had around 100,000 men. Did they really think that they could swallow an elephant? Outside the city, the 5-star army was following the plan. The 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard was at the front. 200 cannons were pushed to the front lines, and 3 regiments of infantry were also at the front lines. They took out their sandbags and prepared to fight at any time. The cavalry of the new 2nd Army stood on both sides of the 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard. While protecting their flanks, they were also prepared to charge into the city at any time. The 60,000 Mongolian soldiers were made up of civilians and captives. Under the leadership of Ahuli, they were also sharpening their swords. They already knew that when the time was right, they would be the first to charge into Sarai. They would be the first to charge into the city of Sarai. This was both an honor and a test. As the first to charge, it was always the most dangerous. However, no one cared anymore. Thinking of the benefits and good things that could be obtained by making military contributions, these poor men were willing to take the risk. Wasn't it true that wealth came from danger? Furthermore, many of them were made up of surrendered soldiers. Wasn't this the best chance for them to show their loyalty to the 5-star army? Many people were eager to give it a try. If they were not facing Salai city, which was once a holy land in their eyes, and still had a trace of respect, many soldiers would have laughed out loud and pointed at the city to make a joke of it. Reporting to the 6th young master, the 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard is ready. The commander of the 2nd Division, Xiao Feng, stood in front of Yang Chendong and saluted. His voice was full of excitement. They were going to attack the Golden Horde that had lasted for more than 200 years. This was the home of the invincible Mongolian elites. It was said that the great Khan of the Golden Horde still had the pure blood of the Golden Horde flowing in his body. How could they not be excited when such a powerful force was about to be rubbed against by their own hands? This was a great achievement. Yang Chendong looked at the excited Xiao Feng and was very satisfied. From the time they entered the camp to the time everything was set up, it only took them 20 minutes. This was enough to prove how hard they trained. It was said that 3 minutes on stage was equivalent to 10 years of hard work. How could it not be the same in the army? A good army not only had to have a good style and be able to win battles, but also had to have strict discipline. They had to be able to remain calm in the face of danger and strike the enemy with lightning speed. Chapter 1439. Good, let's carry out the plan. Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Then, his gaze shifted from Xiao Feng to the city tower of Salai, which was 5 miles away. This time, he wanted to use speed to defeat the slow. While catching the other party off guard, he also wanted to destroy the other party's arrogance and not give them any time to prepare or transfer their assets. For this reason, not only were 200 field cannons pushed to the front line, he also had Beta Persei rush to the front with 8 100mm mortars. When the time was right, he would turn Salai into a fire city and destroy their confidence in resisting. After receiving the order to attack, Xiao Feng gave a standard military salute and led his troops straight to the front of the battlefield. About 3 minutes later, the roaring of the cannons began. Exploding shells shot out from the barrels of the field cannons, heading straight for the city walls 5 miles away. They did not give the other party a chance to face off, nor did they have any intention of talking to the other party. They just fired wildly. This kind of fighting style caused the Mongolian soldiers on the city walls to be stunned. Countless cannonballs landed on the city walls and exploded, forming a rain of bullets. Many Mongolian soldiers who were not ready for battle were hit. The cries of ghosts and howls of wolves could be heard incessantly, and it was getting more and more intense. As the capital of the Golden Horde, there were dozens of cannons on the city tower of Salai. But whether it was the attack range or power, they could not be compared to the field cannons. With the accurate information provided by Gray, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front destroyed all the cannons in the first wave, not giving the other party any chance to fire back. The sound of cannons continued. In a short while, thousands of Mongolian soldiers on the city tower were either dead or injured, turning this place into a hell on earth. Go up the city tower and fire back with arrows. General Amba, who was in charge of the security of the city gate, shouted loudly. He led a group of soldiers to personally supervise the battlefield, and chased the Mongolian soldiers who had come down from the tower out of fear back into the city. Although at such a distance, the so-called bow and arrow attack was useless, but there had to be someone guarding the gate tower. Otherwise, if they gave the Han people an opportunity, who knew if they would rush up the gate tower? If that happened, they would have the higher ground and there would be no way to continue fighting. As the general guarding the gate, he would also be punished by the Great Khan. After a round of slaughter, they finally managed to stop the soldiers from escaping. Due to the sharpness of the blades, the Mongolian soldiers had no choice but to run back up with bitter expressions. General Amba breathed a sigh of relief as he finally managed to control the tide of defeat. At this moment, he heard the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw Muhammad, who looked majestic in his armor, rushing over with his cavalry. It was quite a coincidence. He was in the barracks preparing to bring 50,000 cavalry over to Samara. Who would have thought that the 5-star army would arrive? He was overjoyed, thinking that he could not help but go on a long journey. He could have a good battle with the Han army right at his doorstep. Be it in terms of supplies or soldiers, he would be able to enjoy the benefits of being close to the water. Just as Muhammad was thinking that this was a good thing and was preparing to perform well, the sound of cannons had already sounded out. The siege had actually begun. He was shocked at the speed of the Han army's attack. They had just arrived at the city walls and had already started attacking. If it was the Mongolian cavalry, they probably would not even have time to get into formation. It was because of this that Muhammad judged based on his experience that the other party must have attacked in a hurry. This was also a good chance for him to counterattack. Taking advantage of the time when the other party had not stabilized, a counterattack would definitely result in twice the result with half the effort and increase their chances of victory. The opportunity was fleeting. Without waiting for the 50,000 cavalrymen to gather, Muhammad led the 30,000 cavalrymen straight to the north gate. In truth, the 5-star army had not fully spread out. Only the well-trained cold vanguard soldiers were prepared. Even the new Second Army was still preparing for battle. As for the 60,000 Mongolian troops, they were in a mess. It would take at least an hour for them to fully organize their troops. Muhammad sent out a few of his personal guards to ascend the city gate tower. They saw the performance of the 5-star army outside the city and reported back. "Ha ha ha, as expected, they have come from afar and are not ready. The cavalry has not fully spread out, and this is the best chance for us to attack. Come, open the city gates. The army will march out from the 4 city gates and charge out." Muhammad laughed loudly. He already had the look of a victorious general. The 30,000 cavalry behind him were all filled with excitement. Thinking about how the chance to gain merit was right in front of them, all of them wanted to charge out of the city to show the Han army what they were made of. They wanted to let these arrogant Han know that in terms of horse strength, the Mongols were the best in the world. Once Muhammad gave the order, the 4 city gates were opened. The 30,000 cavalry split into 4 groups and charged out of the city. They looked like they could not wait any longer. As soon as the city gates opened, they galloped out on their horses, shouting and screaming. They looked like they were here and the Han army was ready to die. They are finally out. Behind a bunch of sandbags, 2nd Division Commander Xiao Feng's brows furrowed as he said excitedly. The speed of the Mongol cavalry's reaction exceeded his expectations. He did not expect the enemy to have such a swift reaction. They were definitely elites. Since that was the case, they had to eat them up. Orders: fire when they are 200 steps away. The commander's order was passed down through the soldiers. Very soon, the 3 regiments of cold front soldiers in the circular formation received the order. They took the opportunity to check their guns and ammunition one last time. After making sure that there were no problems, they placed their gun barrels on the sandbags, closed their left eye and opened their right eye, and got ready to shoot. Cannon fire at a 30-degree angle, fire. Lin Luan, who had just been promoted from an artillery battalion commander to a regiment commander, noticed that there were quite a number of Mongolian cavaliers charging out of the city. He wanted to reduce the pressure on the warriors, so he spoke to a group of 20 cannoneers beside him. Once the commander gave the order, the 20 cannons immediately changed directions and shrunk their attack range. They fired fiercely at the city gates, giving the Mongolian cavalry who had just exited the city and had yet to get into formation a direct blow. Under the sound of the cannons, the war horses neighed, and the formation became even more chaotic. After all, humans could counter the might of the cannons, but war horses could not. Seeing that the army was unable to gather up due to the cannons, Muhammad gave up on the idea of a large-scale charge. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "There is no need to gather up. Split up and charge forward. We need to grab the chance." Inside the ring-shaped sandbags, Commander Xiao Feng watched as the cannons fired and landed among the Mongolian cavaliers who came out of the city, causing a certain number of casualties. His expression turned dark, and the other commanders under him also had displeasure on their faces. What is this Lin Luan doing? Does he think that the cannon regiment is not in the limelight enough? He wants to snatch this bit of credit from us. The first to voice out was the 1st Regiment commander, Chai Ji. He could be considered an experienced person, and many times, he dared to express his views and attitude. The 1st Regiment commander was beside Xiao Feng. Usually, when there was a military operation, the 1st Regiment would be with the division headquarters. Such dissatisfaction naturally fell into Xiao Feng's ears. He also felt that it was not good to snatch credit like this. Of course, he also knew that Lin Luan was trying to reduce the pressure on them. However, the 2nd Regiment was already prepared. Just the light and heavy machine guns alone had 100, so how could they be afraid of the Mongol cavalry who were already trapped? Go, inform Colonel Lin that without my orders, there is no need for cannon support. Tell him to do his job properly and be ready to advance at any time. Xiao Feng said to the messenger beside him. These words immediately received the agreement of the surrounding soldiers. It was obvious that this was what they were thinking. The moment the Mongol cavalry left the city, they were hit by a wave of cannon fire. Under the spray of bullets, iron shrapnel and nails flew in all directions. Before the Mongol cavalry could even shout the word "charge," they were already turned into corpses. Under the rumbling of the cannons, the war horses were also affected. They shook their heads and did not listen to orders. In just a single round, they had lost over 1,000 riders. Cold sweat dripped down Muhammad's neck uncontrollably. The cavalry he brought were all elite soldiers. Normally, when they encountered enemies, it was normal for them to fight 1 against 3, or even 4 against 1. However, in just one round of cannon fire, they had lost so many men. If this continued, he did not dare to guarantee that they would win this battle. Fortunately, after 2 rounds of cannon fire, the cannons stopped. The cannons once again smashed towards the city walls. This caused Muhammad to heave a sigh of relief. At the same time, he scolded the stupidity of the Han people. Did they not know that compared to the thick city walls, his cavalry was easier to deal with and was more dangerous? However, Muhammad would not be so kind as to remind the Han army. Since there was no longer the threat of the cannons, he should make use of this time to charge forward. Once they were entangled with the Han cavalry, the cannons would not be able to pose any threat. Everyone, charge, charge. There was no need for Muhammad to say anything. The Mongolian riders who had survived the barrage of cannon fire had already charged forward. They were all veterans, so they naturally knew what to do on the battlefield. Thanks to the previous battles with the White Russians, they had a certain level of understanding towards cannons. At the very least, they would not be afraid to charge forward. More and more Mongol cavalry charged out of the city gates, charging towards the Han army camp. In front of them, there was a Han army camp that was about a li away, and they saw that there was a large circle of soldiers surrounding the area with bags of food. Although they did not know what these people were doing, the Mongol cavalry knew that if they wanted to charge into the camp, they had to deal with these Han people. Chapter 1440. Charge. Surround them and kill them with arrows. Don't waste time. Muhammad shouted loudly. He did not care about these Han soldiers at all. To him, as long as his cavalry charged forward, he would be able to chop off their heads to show the might of the Mongol army. They're here, they're here. 500 steps, 400 steps, 300 steps, attack. Xiao Feng stared ahead. When he saw that the vanguard of the Mongol cavalry had already charged into the attack zone, he did not hold back anymore. With a shout, the light machine gun in his hand spat out flames. Along with the sound, a division of machine guns beside him also spat out flames. A total of 30 machine guns also spat out flames at this moment. On the battlefield, 30 machine guns opened fire at this moment, and the continuous tongues of fire shot towards the charging Mongol cavalry. Row after row of Mongolian cavaliers who charged forward were covered in blood, and they fell off their horses one after another. It was as if the charging group was blocked by a flood of bullets, and the corpses piled up higher and higher beyond the limit of 300 paces. More and more Mongol cavalry died under the guns. In the face of such an area of effect attack, they did not have much time to think. With the inertia of the war horses, they could not stop even if they wanted to. Under such fierce firepower, the number of charging Mongol cavalry decreased rapidly, and their hearts were slowly taken over by fear. They had never seen weapons that could kill so cleanly, and at this moment, they were panicking. Even though they charged forward with all their might under the orders of their generals, they were just cold corpses under these weapons. As the small mountain of corpses piled up higher and higher, the despair in the hearts of the Mongol cavalry finally exploded. "Run!" No one knew who shouted this in the crowd, but the Mongolian cavaliers who were originally charging forward started to scatter, just as they expected. These cavalrymen would rather die under military law than die under the bombardment of cannons and bullets. At least the former would leave behind a corpse, while the latter would be smashed into pieces. The 30,000 elite Mongolian cavaliers charged forward like chives, and they fell one by one. Under such an attack from all sides, be it generals or soldiers, they were all treated the same. Bullets did not have eyes, and no matter who it was, they were all killed. Muhammad, who was charging at the front, did not escape death because of his identity as a general. When several bullets penetrated his body, he struggled to raise his arm before falling off the horse with a plop. Muhammad was a great general of the Golden Horde. Even 8 to 10 people would not be able to get close to him on the battlefield. But now, he was killed by a flintlock. It was also proven that his body was also made of flesh. When faced with a fatal bullet, he was no different from the others. Even Muhammad had died in battle, and the Mongolian cavalry who charged out could not see any hope of victory. At this moment, the sound of gunfire had yet to stop. Not only that, the walls of Salai city, under the continuous attack of the field artillery, finally cracked open a huge hole that was more than 30 meters long. As the walls collapsed, it created enough conditions for the cavalry to charge. Yang Chendong put down the binoculars in his hand and said in a firm voice, "Expand the results of the battle." Cavalry charge. The cannon fire was still going on, and the gap on the city wall was getting bigger and bigger. The 5-star army cavalry saw an opportunity and received orders to attack. According to the plan, the 60,000 Mongolian soldiers would charge at the front. After all, the city wall had just been broken, and there would still be resistance within the city. It would be very dangerous. If the conditions were right, they would not let the new Second Army attack. Yang Chendong had his own thoughts, and he did not intend to hide them from the others. Huli was well aware of this, but he didn't blame anyone. On the contrary, he acquiesced to this practice. After all, he had once been the great Khan and had once commanded an army of 30,000. Although they were all his own army, they would still be divided. This time, letting the 60,000 Mongolian soldiers attack first was dangerous, but it was also a great opportunity. If they wanted to make a contribution, they could not be afraid of death. Moreover, the most worthless thing in this chaotic world was human life. Not to mention, the King Wunan of Daimyang had already promised them that as long as the soldiers were registered, even if they died in battle, their families would be compensated. This was something that had never happened before. While Ahuli was open-minded, the Mongolian soldiers were open-minded as well. The moment they received the order to charge, they threw aside the fear in their hearts. Right now, they only cared about killing the enemy and gaining merit. Not to mention, many of them had been bullied by the Golden Horde. Some of their parents had even died at the hands of the Mongolian cavalry. Now was the time to take revenge. Once the 60,000 Mongolian cavalry charged, just the momentum alone could not be described with words. When the Mongolian cavalry on the city walls saw the black mass of soldiers approaching, they were scared out of their wits. They screamed and yelled in panic. They no longer had the courage to defend the city, so they turned around and ran back into the city. It was still the same saying, no one would choose to die if they could live. Although they were soldiers of the Golden Horde, they had not sold their lives to anyone. Knowing that they could not stop the enemy, only idiots would charge out and fight. The soldiers on the city wall quickly retreated. They ran faster than when they were facing the threat of the cannons. As a result, General Amba and his soldiers could no longer hold their ground. After killing dozens of people, they still could not stop the army from collapsing. In desperation, Amba had to take his soldiers to the golden tent in the city. The cannons rumbled, and Mahama and the Golden Horde had already heard it. Although the distance was rather far and the cannons could not reach him, just the sound alone was enough to tell that the power of the cannons was not small. Unknowingly, Mahama had a bad feeling. This Han army seemed to be different from the Han army in the past. This was the first time he had doubts about whether he could defeat such an opponent. At this time, a group of officials and generals had already gathered in the Golden Horde. They had all come to ask the Great Khan for advice. Although the Great Khan did not know more than them, they did not have any better ideas. Mahama sat high up and looked at the panicked crowd. He said with a faint smile, "Everyone, do not worry. Muhammad has already brought 30,000 elite cavalry out of the city. I believe that good news will come soon." "Oh, then it's fine." Hearing that the number one general, Muhammad, had already led out an army of 30,000 elite steel cavalrymen, everyone revealed a relieved expression. After temporarily stabilizing everyone's mind, Mahama said again, "After all, the Han army has more than 100,000 soldiers. We cannot lower our guard. We need to continue to send out troops. This time, since the Han army has come, don't think about going back. Everyone, who will go out to fight?" Mahama was not confident that he could destroy the Han army with just 30,000 fine iron. Therefore, he needed to send more troops to the battlefield. He needed to have enough advantage in numbers. Only in this way can he completely win this war. Especially when they were discussing, the sound of cannons did not stop. Mahama was even more certain of the idea of sending reinforcements. Hearing that they still needed to send people out, everyone deeply agreed. The Han army was an army with cannons. Just 30,000 cavalry was not enough. But after all, they were facing cannons that killed without blinking. Once they entered the battlefield, there was a possibility of losing their lives. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. No one rashly took the initiative to stand out. "What? Could it be that you want this Khan to call your names?" Seeing that no one responded, Mahama's face showed a trace of anger. His son, Bora, was also watching coldly from the side. He saw the corners of everyone's mouth. If there was a chance in the future, he would not spare these people. Thinking back to their ancestors, what kind of glory did they have? Wherever they went, no one could stop them, no one could match them. At that time, there was no lack of fierce generals. But only a few years had passed. Everyone was used to living a good life and began to fear death. The Han army had already arrived at their doorstep. No one dared to take the initiative to stand out. No wonder in these years, when they fought with the White Russians, their advantage was getting smaller and smaller. With such generals, it was only a matter of time before the country was destroyed. Mahama's eyes were still coldly staring at everyone. If no one stood out, he would call their names. But at this time, there was a sudden sound of hurried footsteps. Then, a guard from the golden tent entered the hall and said anxiously, "Great Khan, General Amba requests an audience." Amba? Mahama instinctively frowned. Isn't he guarding the city wall? Why did he come down without orders? Father, there must be something important to report. Why don't we call him in first? Bora also felt that the situation was not good. But if he wanted to know what happened, he still needed to see Amba. Call him in. Mahama nodded and ordered the guard, then straightened his body. Soon, Amba entered the hall with a tired face. When he saw Mahama sitting high above, he immediately saluted, put his right hand on his chest, lowered his head and said respectfully, "This General Amba greets the Great Khan." Amba, why didn't you guard the city well? Why did you come here? Mahama was already very anxious in his heart, but in front of everyone, he suppressed his anxiety and asked. "Great Khan, this general is guilty." With a plop, Amba suddenly knelt on the ground. Then, with snot and tears, he told the story of how Muhammad's 30,000 elite cavalry was almost wiped out. Amba finally finished, then lowered his head, not daring to raise it again. At this moment, the hall was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. Everyone was shocked by these words and stood there without saying a word. Chapter 1441. No one had expected that the battle would end up like this. How long had it been? Not only had they lost the city gate, even the 30,000 elite cavalry that Muhammad had brought with him were gone. That was 30,000 elite cavalry. If it was a clash of swords and spears on the battlefield, even 100,000 ordinary Mongolian cavalry would not dare to claim victory. But now, they were all gone. What was going on? Could it be that the strength of the Han army is stronger than their elite cavalry? Everyone turned pale with fright. In the end, they all looked at Khan Mahama. At this time, they had no idea what to do and could only listen to the Khan's orders. How could Mahama not be startled? He had thought that this battle would be very difficult, and he had even prepared to pay a certain price. But he had never expected that they would lose so quickly. From the time they learned of the 5-star army's appearance to the loss of the city gate, it had only been a little more than 2 hours. What could they do in this time? If it was an ordinary army, they would not have finished gathering. But the Han army had already attacked. What was going on with this world? When did the Han army become so strong? There were 100,000 questions in his heart. Mahama had many questions that he wanted to understand. But now, he did not have the time. Since the city gate had been lost and the cavalry had been defeated, he was afraid that the 5-star army would enter the city soon. After losing the protection of the city wall, he had not expected such a thing to happen. Without sufficient preparation, Mahama knew that the situation would only become more cruel and not optimistic. Men, drag Amba away and behead him. Mahama was worthy of being a Khan for many years. His reaction was very fast. He first glanced at Amba, who was kneeling on the ground, with a fierce look on his face. The more chaotic the situation was, the more stable the people's hearts were. This Amba could be used for this. After receiving the order, the guards outside the hall rushed into the hall, picked up the kneeling Amba, and walked out of the hall. Amba did not expect that the Khan would actually kill him. Did he think that this was a time when people were needed and he could take the blame? Also, why didn't any of the ministers and generals who were usually on good terms with him speak up for him? Could it be that the friendship between people wasn't worth a try? If he had known this would happen, he would have just run away. Who would have come back to report this? Since he was going to die sooner or later, he might as well take a gamble. In fact, Amba had wrongly blamed his friends. Everyone was just shocked by the news he brought, and for a while, they had not recovered from their shock. In addition, Mahama's decision was too sudden. By the time they reacted and wanted to plead for their old friend, Amba had already been dragged away and beheaded. Amba died just like that. This greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. Some people even seemed to think of themselves in the future because of this, and couldn't help but have ugly expressions. It was at this moment that Mahama took the opportunity to speak while everyone was still unsettled. The Han people only used their cannons to break through the walls. In terms of horse riding, who can be a match for us Mongols? As long as we can hold them off for a while, with our advantage in numbers and the support from the surrounding tribes, destroying the Han army is just a matter of raising our hands. In this way, where are Barry and Yutu? I order the two of you to lead your cavalry to meet the Han army. Even if you can't drive them out of the city, you must stop them from entering the city. We will have other reinforcements coming later. Accept the order. First, he encouraged everyone and strengthened their confidence in winning. Then, Mahama called out two names and ordered them to lead the troops. Barry and Yutu, who were called out, paled and looked very ugly. How was this asking them to go to war? It was clearly asking them to die. Even the 30,000 elite cavalry led by General Muhammad was not a match for the Han army. They only had 10,000 cavalry, how could they fight against the Han army? The two wanted to refuse, but when they thought of Amba's fate and looked at Mahama, who was sitting at the head of the table with a murderous look on his face, they finally did not say anything. They could only stand up and say reluctantly, "Great Khan, we are willing to go, but we hope that the reinforcements will arrive in time. Generals, don't worry. Salai City is the capital of the Golden Horde. No one wants to defend this place more than me. Rest assured, Prince Bora will lead reinforcements to assist you in a short while," Mahama said in a solemn manner with an expectant look on his face. Yes. Hearing the Great Khan's promise and thinking of the importance of Salai City, the two generals nodded and left the hall to prepare the troops. Everyone quickly left. They also had to organize the troops in the city and prepare to fight against the Han army at any time. Prince Bola also received his father's orders and began to mobilize all the troops in the city. He also distributed food and was ready to enter the battlefield at any time. Everything was planned well. Mahama was also prepared to fight to the death with the Han army. Over the years, Salai City had been under his management, and the land it occupied was large enough to accommodate 1 million civilians and soldiers. With such a large city, with such a large population, it was enough to tire the 100,000-strong Han army out of breath. Once the time was right, it would be the time for them to counterattack. When it came to plans, there were always changes. The two of them seemed to always appear at the same time. Just as the Mongolian army in the city started to mobilize and prepare for battle, the sound of cannons exploding rang out from the sky, landing directly in the inner city. Many of the nobles and officials in the inner city were destroyed by the cannons, and many of them died. Beta Persei finally could not help but take action. He brought 8 100mm mortars that could fire up to 13 li and launched an attack. Yang Chendong was good at reading people's minds. He knew when and what to do to maximize the benefits. With 120,000 people, it was not easy to take down Salai City. Even with the powerful cannons in his hands, it was not easy. It must be known that in the Golden Horde, every citizen could be a soldier. From old people in their 50s to children in their 20s and 13-year-olds, they could all wield their swords and kill the enemy. One could only imagine how many of these millions of people were capable of fighting. If they only relied on pushing forward step by step, once the enemy reacted, even if they could defeat them, they would have to pay a heavy price. This was not what Yang Chendong wanted. He wanted to use a swift and decisive method to defeat the enemy and obtain the greatest benefits. As such, the firepower of the cannons had to be maximized. As such, Beta Persei took action. He brought 8 100mm mortars and quickly advanced after the city walls were broken. Following the map that Gray had provided, after finding a safe and powerful position, he began to fire in all directions. In order to give the enemy the feeling of a huge army and cannons everywhere. The 8 cannons fired in 8 different directions. When the cannons were fired, it gave people a feeling of explosions everywhere. This caused the Mongol army, who were originally fighting, to lose their morale and confidence. Fire! Fire with all your might. Don't be stingy with the cannons. Beta Persei led 500 black cavalry soldiers to a courtyard under the city walls. 200 black cavalry soldiers were in charge of security, while the other 300 black cavalry soldiers were busy moving the cannons and firing the cannons in an orderly manner. Before they came, Yang Chendong had said that as long as they could scare the Mongols away, it would be worth it no matter how many cannons they used. After receiving the order, Beta Persei unleashed all the cannons he could to achieve his goal. His face was filled with an excited expression. Explosions continued to ring out in the city. Who knew how many Mongols had died under the cannon fire? In the face of such long-range cannons, they did not even know where the enemy was or how many cannons they had. From this, one could see how difficult this battle was. Not knowing where the cannons would land, there was no place that was absolutely safe. After a few rounds of cannon fire, many unlucky Mongol nobles had already died under the cannon fire. When they saw their old friends die without any warning, those who were still alive had no choice but to escape. If they could not even see the enemy, how were they going to fight this battle? Since they could not fight, they could only escape. Although doing so was not very loyal, and they might be punished by the Great Khan. However, it was just death. With the thought of living for as long as they could, more and more nobles, officials, generals and even commoners made the decision to leave the city and abandon Salai city. As such, there was such a scene. The east gate of the city had unknowingly been opened, and more Mongols were escaping. In order to escape, many people did not even have the time to tidy up their belongings. Instead, they only took some valuables and left the city. Great Khan Mahama, who was in charge of overseeing everything in the city, quickly received the news. In a fit of rage, he pushed the table in front of him to the ground and roared out, "What are they doing? Are they abandoning the legacy of their ancestors? Are they not afraid of this Khan punishing them?" The scout general was also trusted by Mahama. Bodo, who was in charge of overseeing the city, stood in the hall with an ugly expression, not daring to speak. "Budwa, pass on this Khan's order. Kill all those who try to escape without orders as a warning to others." Mahama was so angry that he shouted in fear and issued the order. Bodo, who had always carried out Mahama's orders thoroughly, had a difficult expression on his face this time. He gritted his teeth and seemed to have made up his mind as he said, "Great Khan, there are too many people running away. We can't kill them all. If we really do that, I'm afraid it will cause a conflict, and that will only benefit the Han army." The Mongols were different from the Han. At that time, they were backward and did not know what virtue was, what filial piety was, and what it meant when the ruler ordered his subjects to die. Chapter 1442. Their hearts were full of wildness. If someone wanted to harm them, even if that person was the Great Khan, they would still dare to fight back. It was precisely because of this consideration that Bodo came up with such a statement. Because if they really started a massacre at the East Gate, those nobles and generals who escaped would definitely kill them. In this way, the ones who would benefit from killing each other would be the Han army that entered the city. How could Mahama not know this? It's just that he was really angry. He was angry at the 5-star army for not playing by the rules, he was angry at the cowardice of his subordinates, and he regretted that he was about to abandon Salai city. Yes, at this time, Mahama also made the same decision as everyone else, and that was to escape the city. Compared to others, Mahama cherished his life even more. He enjoyed the feeling of being above others. Clothes were stretched out for him and food was served to him. This made him even more afraid of death. He was afraid that he would lose everything. After knowing that the city couldn't be defended, he could only choose to escape if he wanted to live. Sigh, forget it. Since that's the case, how can this Khan do something that hurts his loved ones and pleases his enemies? Go, call the prince over. Mahama said to Bodo with a compassionate look. He was obviously forced to, but he pretended to be considerate of everyone. Bodo couldn't see it, but for the sake of his own life, he still cooperated and said, "The great Khan is wise, the officials will definitely thank the great Khan for his painstaking efforts." "Okay, go call the prince over," Mahama said with a disheartened look. The great Khan also escaped. The 20,000 iron armor army that Prince Bola had just gathered became a tool to open up a path for escape. In order to allow the great Khan to escape from the city smoothly, these cavalrymen with golden armor slaughtered their way out of the east gate. Countless courtiers died because they stood in the way. The spies that were arranged in the city immediately reported this news to the new Second Army's commander. At this time, Beta Persei also appeared with 500 black cavalry soldiers. Along the way, they had fired countless cannonballs and killed countless people. Finally, they had turned the city into a mess. She had already heard from a spy about Mahama. He heard that when she left the city, just the carriage that accompanied her stretched for 6 to 7 li. Even if one were to think with one's toes, one would be able to guess how much treasure had been transported away. Thinking back to what the sixth young master had said earlier, one of the main objectives of the urgent attack on Salai City was to seize the wealth and relieve the financial pressure of the army. Then how could he let the money under his nose slip away like this? When he saw Beta Persei walking over, he immediately stepped forward and voiced his thoughts. Beta Persei was overjoyed. He was just worried that he would not have the chance to properly deal with the Mongolian cavalry. Now that the excuse had come, and coincidentally, the young master was not by his side, wouldn't he be able to take the initiative to attack? "Commander Shi, we can't hesitate on this matter. Otherwise, the young master will not be happy with the treasure being transported out of the city. How about this, give me a cavalry, and I will personally chase after them." Beta Persei put on an appearance of wholeheartedly serving the public, but wanting to lead an army proved that he wanted to go to the battlefield for his own selfish reasons. She understood Beta Persei a little and chuckled. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble second brother. How about this, I'll arrange for the 1st and 3rd divisions to come over and listen to your orders." "Okay." 2 divisions at once, that was more than 10,000 people. Beta Persei immediately agreed. Salai City had not been completely pacified yet, and they still needed to leave enough troops behind. This was already a great effort, and it should also be for the sake of the young master. Mahama escaped. Under the circumstances, he had no choice but to escape for his own safety. He was heading towards New Salai City, which was southeast of Salai City. There was originally a large construction project there, and it was going to be the new Xinjing city. It was a good place to take refuge. Along with him, there were hundreds of thousands of nobles, officials, soldiers, and civilians. Among them, the number of civilians was the least. When everyone wanted to leave through the city gates, the civilians belonged to the vulnerable group. In the face of sharp swords, they had no choice but to make way for the nobles. Because of this, they missed the opportunity to escape the city. In the end, after the 5-star army guarded the 4 gates, they were trapped in the city. Beta Persei led 500 black cavalry and 2 divisions of cavalry out of the city to chase after them. She also began to concentrate his forces to guard the 4 gates, and at the same time, to surround and kill some of the armed Mongolian soldiers in the city. This was the place where the Xinjing city of the Golden Horde was located. It was once a place where everyone was a soldier. Although Mahama and the others had left, they still could not be careless. She was a serious and methodical person. When a mission was handed to him, he only needed enough time to complete it. What made him happy was that under the heavy siege, many Mongolian generals came to join him. Among them, Baru and Wu Tuo were the 2 leaders. They were the ones who were left behind by Muhammad to block the 5-star army. But when they saw that the artillery was everywhere, had a long range, and was powerful, how could they still fight? In addition, they heard that the great Khan and the nobles had already left the city, and they were abandoned. The feeling of being abandoned was quite unpleasant. They did not want to die, and they did not want to die without knowing why. After a final discussion, they came to join him. They had already asked around. This Han commander could be considered half a Mongolian, so he would not make things difficult for them. Naturally, he was overjoyed that the two generals got along so well with each other. He immediately said that the 5-star army was in need of people. As long as the two generals were sincere, not only would they not make any mistakes, they would even be rewarded. As for how much they would be rewarded, it would depend on their performance. Generals, the 5-star army places more importance on ability and less on experience and background. As long as you do your best, you will be able to obtain a Han nationality in the future. You will be able to enjoy endless riches and safety. You must make good use of this opportunity. Shibi said earnestly to Barry and Wu Tuo. Yes, thank you General Shibi for your reminder. But what can we do next? Baru and Wu Tuo were naturally very happy. Who did not want to pursue a better life? In the past, it was only because they did not have the opportunity. Now, it was time for them to perform. How about this? The two generals should be very familiar with the situation in the city. I will leave the law and order here to you. Firstly, suppress all the opposing forces in the city, and give the people a peaceful environment. Secondly, find the gold and silver hidden in the city and give it to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Once the matter is settled, I will naturally request for the two generals to be rewarded. Shibi was intentionally testing the loyalty of the two generals. He did not intend to give them a single soldier, and allowed them to do as they pleased. This way, even if something happened, he would not lose anything. Baru and Wu Tuo, who were left behind by Muhammad, although they were generals, their status was not very high. Otherwise, they would not have been given such a difficult task. Now that they had the opportunity to perform well in front of their new master, who would not work hard. With their help, the situation in the city quickly became much more stable. Not only that, the two generals also persuaded many people to help the 5-star army maintain the law and order in the city. Later, Shibi counted that the number of people had reached 100,000. This was 100,000 strong young men. Once they were used well, they could form an army. With this feeling of joy, Shibi sent someone to report this matter to Yang Chendong, who was preparing to enter the city. 100,000 Mongolian soldiers, this is not a small harvest. Let's go into the city and take a look. Yang Chendong, who was in a good mood, laughed heartily. Then, under the protection of the 1,500 black cavalry and the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, he entered the city of Salai. Just as Yang Chendong entered the city, Beta Persei also led the army back into the city. This time, the pursuit did not go too smoothly. Muhammad was like a gecko cutting off its tail. He left behind all the slow carriages and followed the cavalry to speed up and leave. Considering that the road ahead was unclear, they were afraid of being ambushed. In addition, the pursuit of the treasure was completed smoothly, so Beta Persei led the army back to the city. After some calculations, the treasure that Beta Persei chased back was equivalent to 40 million taels of silver. In addition, Muhammad and the others left in a hurry and did not have time to take many things away. Even the national treasury only took a quarter of the wealth. Now, the rest that could not be taken away in time all became the property of the 5-star army. The wealth of Salai city was beyond Yang Chendong's expectations. The liquidation of the entire property took thousands of people 7 days, and the final result was actually 230 million taels of silver. Later on, it was found that a lot of the wealth came from the Han people hundreds of years ago. However, because the Mongols did not know how to invest, and they did not like these yellow and white things. Many things had been left in the national treasury without being touched. This was how they managed to gather such a large amount of silver. Now, it was a one-time benefit to Yang Xie's army. With so much silver, Yang Chendong felt that his journey was not in vain. All the investments in the Far East, Siberia, and the recent battles had been recovered, and he had made a lot of money. Overjoyed, he ordered people to leave 5,000 taels of silver for development, and sent the other 180 million taels of silver back to Qiqian city. This was the fastest way to plunder wealth in war. Yang Chendong taught everyone a lesson. He believed that the opposition should be much smaller when he went to war in the future. With the help of Baruch, Wutu, and the others, the security in Salai city quickly stabilized. With the continuous migration of foreign people under Yang Xie, and the migration of the people here, everything related to this place would gradually be wiped out in the wheel of history. Perhaps after a few decades or 100 years, the people here would forget that this place was once the capital of the Golden Horde. At that time, the culture of the Han people and their status as landlords would completely dominate this place. By then, it would really be deeply rooted and could not be easily shaken. Chapter 1443. Yang Chendong had also decided to rewrite history. In the future, the entire world would belong to the Han, and history would be written as such. Even if one day his descendants failed to live up to his expectations, his opponents would only appear as traitors. He wanted to establish the concept that the Han were the true rulers of this world. After 10 days of delay in Salai city, on the morning of the 11th day, the army once again set out. Their target was New Salai city. Their goal of plundering wealth had been achieved. Next, it was time to completely eliminate their opponent, the Golden Horde. The army moved out in a mighty manner. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers left the city like a long dragon. Looking from afar, it seemed to cover the sky. Compared to the time when they had attacked Salai city, there were now 100,000 more Mongolian soldiers. Gray, Barry, Wu Tuo and the others had been personally tested by Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong had found that they were truly talented, and they had also joined the battle. They had gone from being generals of the Golden Horde to being generals of the 5-Star Corps. This time, the reaction of the Golden Horde was much faster. With the previous lesson, Scout General Bodo had already arranged for people to keep an eye on the situation. When he found out that the Han army was moving out, he immediately reported it to the Great Han. At this time, Mahama, who had just settled down in New Salai city, heard the news and his face turned red in anger. They had always been the ones chasing after others and beating them up. Now that it was finally his turn, he couldn't accept it. These Han soldiers are too much. Do they really think this Khan is afraid of them? Have the troops sent to protect the emperor arrived? Bodo, who had been waiting for this question, immediately replied, Great Khan, there are already a dozen tribes that have heard the news and arrived outside New Salai city. There are still a dozen tribes that are rushing here because of the longer journey. If we add them all together, there are hundreds of thousands of people. It's enough to deal with the Han army. Good. If that's the case, order people to pacify the tribes that have already arrived. Send people to urge the tribes that have yet to arrive. At the same time, clear out a wide area in front of the city. The battlefield should be at least 50 li horizontally. This time, we will meet the Han army here. We can't retreat anymore. This Khan wants to see if these Han people really have 3 heads and 6 arms. Even if that's the case, this time, we will not let them return. Mahama said with a face full of confidence. He was not prepared to retreat anymore, or rather, there was no place for him to retreat to. Although the Golden Horde was huge, after years of development, its population was not small. However, there were only a few large cities. Firstly, it had to do with their habits. Living in the city was comfortable, but how could they survive without grazing? Secondly, they did not know how to run a business. Even if they spent a lot of effort to build a city, not only would there be no income, but they would also have to pay for it. How could Mahama and the previous great Khans do such a loss-making business? After losing a few major cities, especially after losing Sarai, Mahama did not want to retreat anymore. He was prepared to fight to the death here. This time, he would bring a few 100,000 Mongolian elites to teach the Han army a lesson. Mahama had already made up his mind, and no one dared to persuade him anymore. Thus, they contacted the other tribes and invited them to gather at New Sarai city to fight the Han army. For this, the ministers, generals and nobles who followed Mahama promised countless benefits. More and more tribes received requests to mobilize their troops, and not many tribes dared to refuse. Although the people in charge of relaying the message were polite, there was a strong sense of threat in their words. For example, if they could come, they would be extremely grateful and promised benefits. If they could not come, then they would have to take care of themselves. Just a simple sentence of, "Take care of yourself," was enough to shake the hearts of many small clan leaders. They sighed deeply and had no choice but to send out reinforcements. He was one of them. As the leader of a small Mongolian tribe, he had 30,000 Mongolian civilians under his rule. Among them, 5,000 were young and strong cavalry. Although he was not as strong as the larger tribes, he was still a decent force among the smaller tribes. In the past, when they fought with the Rasi principalities, they had been sent out to fight. Every time, regardless of whether they won or lost, they would have to retreat with their tails between their legs. After a few times, he had some opinions. He was a valiant general with a height of more than 8 feet. He was tall and strong. Just by standing in front of him, he gave off a strong sense of pressure. He was also very strong, and his equestrian skills were extraordinary. Even the experts of the tribe would not be able to get close to him in a group. Such people usually had a straightforward temper. They didn't beat around the bush and liked to go straight to the point. But no matter what his temperament was, he did not dare to refuse the requests of the Golden Horde. He did not forget that there was once a leader of a small tribe who was on good terms with him. Because he fell ill, he was delayed in sending out reinforcements. As a result, he was massacred by the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. The entire tribe had more than 10,000 people, regardless of gender or age, none of them survived. When he heard the news, he had rushed over to take a look. When he saw that there were children in swaddling clothes who had died under the scimitar, he was completely shocked. Although over the years, he had killed many people, but he had not killed such young children. This was clearly a move to exterminate the tribe. From then on, he hated the self-proclaimed orthodox leaders of the Golden Horde. At the same time, he was also afraid of them. If they had any orders in the future, he would not dare to disobey. This time, he, who had received another order, quickly gathered the young men in the tribe. Nearly 1,000 of them were new recruits. They had just been added. Some of them were only 13 or 14 years old. However, as Mongolians, they had grown up on horseback. Even at this age, their horsemanship was quite good. "Chief, you must bring them back safely." A woman who looked to be in her 30s but was still very beautiful said to he with a pleading look. She was he's wife, Wu Yun. She was very wise in Mongolian. This woman had played a big role in the development of the tribe to this day. Every time the men went to war, she would lead the entire tribe and the women to wait for their husband's return. In the past, Wu Yun would also give a few words of advice when he went to war. But this time, it was different. Her eyes were filled with tears. It was because her and his son, Dorza, was among the nearly 1,000 new recruits. He was just a child who had just reached the age of 14. In the last war, when they fought the Rasi, the tribe lost nearly 1,000 people. This time, they had to choose from boys who had just turned 14 years old. Although it was said to be a selection, it was actually a selection of people. In a small tribe of 30,000 people, the ratio of boys was not high. As the chief's son, Duo Jia was naturally chosen to join the army. If he wanted other people's children to send their sons to him, as the chief, how could he not set an example? Looking at Wu Yun's teary face, how could he not understand what she was thinking? He sighed and said, "The young eagle will grow up sooner or later. How can a man become a real man if he doesn't go through hardships? You must believe in our son Duo Jia. He will definitely survive the cruel war." With such a serious tone, he had already made his stance clear. That is, if something happened, he would definitely not take care of them. In his eyes, these 5,000 people were all his soldiers and there was no distinction between them. Wu Yun, who had long been familiar with he's life, was slightly disappointed. But there was nothing she could do. She could only loosen her grip on he's arm and prepare to let him go. But at this time, a soldier's voice suddenly came from outside the yurt. "Chief, there is a person who claims to be your good friend, who wants to see you." Anda? He was not surprised when he heard this. Every time before a war, the leaders of other tribes would come to discuss this matter. First of all, it was to unify everyone's opinions. Once on the battlefield, rootless duckweeds like them could support and help each other. That might increase their chances of survival. He also thought that the other tribes had sent people to discuss this matter, so he said, "Invite the distinguished guest in." The curtain of the yurt was lifted from the outside, revealing a burly man. Although he was slightly weaker than there was not much difference. The moment this person appeared, a look of shock flashed across he's originally calm eyes. He opened his mouth and could not help but ask, "General Gray, why are you here?" It was no wonder that he was so surprised. He had heard that Gray had become a traitor of the Golden Horde and a lackey of the Han people. How could a person who was wanted by the Golden Horde appear here? What was going on? In a short while, he thought of many things. It was only when his wife, Dark Cloud, touched his arm that he came back to his senses. He hurriedly said, "Come, General Gray, please." He and Gray had a very good personal relationship. It was because of his excellent performance in a battle that attracted Gray's attention. In contrast, Gray was a very famous general in the eyes of the Golden Horde Khan. To be able to establish such a relationship was naturally what he wanted. Both sides were interested, and their relationship was getting better and better. When he heard that Gray had joined the Han people, he did not believe it. At the same time, he also felt a sense of sadness. He did not even have his own backing. In this battle, he had no confidence. Without an acquaintance to take care of him, he was full of worries about the future. Chapter 1444. Who would have thought that Gray would appear in front of him at this time? What was he doing? Was he still a member of the Golden Horde? Whose attitude did he represent this time? What should he do? Many thoughts flashed through his mind in a short while, but he still pretended to be calm on the surface. He said to Wu Yun, "Our esteemed guest is here. Go and prepare some food." Wu Yun knew that he was looking for an excuse to make her leave. She nodded sensibly and gave Gray an apologetic smile before turning to leave. When only the two of them were left in the tent, it suddenly became quiet. Gray's voice broke the silence as he sized up he seriously. "What? Are you surprised that I'm here?" He didn't expect Gray to ask this. Originally, he thought that if Gray didn't mention it, he wouldn't take the initiative to mention Gray's position. But now, he had no way out. He could only nod. "That's right. I heard that General Gray has surrendered to the Han people." "Is that true?" "That's right. I surrendered to the Han people." Gray only waited for he to finish speaking before quickly giving an answer. This caused he to be surprised. In the eyes of the Mongols, surrendering to the Han was an extremely shameful thing. Any self-proclaimed man would never do such a thing. However, at this moment, Gray had actually admitted to it in such a straightforward manner. This had truly exceeded his expectations. Even if Gray had just found a reason or used a more tactful way of saying it, it would have been fine. Seeing the surprise on He's face, Gray shook his head and smiled. If it was in the past, he would definitely not say such a thing. He would be proud of surrendering to the Han people. But this time, after seeing the power of the 5-star Army's firearms, he was convinced. He also completely understood that if the Golden Horde were to face the tyrannical power of the 5-star Army, there would only be one result, and that was failure. As for the degree of failure, it would depend on how strong Mahama's resistance was. If the entire Mongolian people resisted, although the Mongolians would not be completely wiped out, they would definitely suffer a great loss. Since that was the case, Gray believed that what he needed to do was to preserve as much of the strength of the Mongols as possible. Hence, when he heard that Mahama was gathering the Mongol army towards New Salai city, he took the initiative to ask Yang Chendong. He wanted to persuade more Mongol tribes not to become enemies with the 5-star army. What Gray didn't expect was that after hearing his request, Yang Chendong only hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Not only did Yang Chendong give him a sizable amount of gold and silver, he even allowed him to leave the camp with a dozen of his personal guards. Not only did he not send anyone to keep an eye on them, he also gave them enough money. A look of disbelief appeared on Gray's face as he walked out of the 5-star Army's camp. He finally understood what the big picture was and what it meant to be broad-minded. There was no doubt that Yang Chendong possessed these characteristics. Just in terms of structure alone, he was far superior to Mahama. It was also because of this that Gray wanted to do a good job in persuading the Mongolians to surrender. This wasn't just to preserve the bloodline of the Mongols. More importantly, he wanted to prove to Yang Chendong that he had not misjudged him. Since he had received money and gained trust, he would do a good job. Thus, Gray came to the leader who had a good personal relationship with him, and most importantly, who was sincere in his consideration for his tribe. Not all Mongol leaders were good to their tribe. Due to their living habits, the Mongols who lived by herding animals could not gather in a city like the Han people. If not, where would they find such abundant water plants? Because of this, the scattered Mongol tribes would often fight over land with abundant water and grass. Once they gained power, some leaders' greedy natures would be exposed. They would take the best things in the tribe for themselves, becoming a parasite that could enjoy life without putting in any effort. There were many other tribal leaders like him. They only needed to curry favor with the nobles of the Golden Horde to secure their positions. However, most of these leaders did not have much fighting strength. Even if they led their troops to victory, it was only because the enemy was too weak or because the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. There were those who reaped without sowing, and there were also those like he who shared the suffering of the people. Gray naturally respected the latter. Not only did such leaders win the hearts of the people, but their soldiers also dared to fight to the death. Such people were the ones he should recruit. They were the ones who should be protected and passed down in the Mongol army. Since he had decided on his target, Gray thought of many methods along the way. In the end, he decided to tell the truth. For a straightforward leader like if you tried to deceive him, it would only have the opposite effect if he found out. After deciding to speak the truth, Gray's direct and straightforward attitude and reply came about. He, who was not prepared, was confused by Gray's actions. Fortunately, Gray did not rush him. Instead, he sat there quietly, waiting for he to think and consider. He only needed to be prepared to answer at any time. After at least the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he slowly raised his head and looked at Gray. "General Gray, are you here to persuade me to surrender?" "Yes." "Why?" That's because a hero like you shouldn't become the victim of Mahama's wrongdoings. Gray said resolutely. Since he had already submitted to Yang Chendong, the so-called Great Khan of the Golden Horde was nothing in his eyes. There was no need for him to show any mercy. Sacrifice? He was puzzled. That's right, a sacrifice. Don't you think so? Over the years, how many battles have you fought for the Golden Horde? What did you get in the end? What else do you have other than the most basic rations you can obtain during the war? Gray laughed coldly and said, "Oh, if you want to say anything, I'm afraid that there are fewer and fewer men in the tribe, and their strength is getting weaker. Do you know that this is Mama's goal? He wants to use his opponents to weaken the strength of your tribes. Only in this way can no one threaten him and replace him." Er's expression kept changing as he listened to them. Of course, he understood the logic behind this. Not only him, but the other tribe leaders also saw it clearly. But what could they do? If they did not listen to Mama, the other party's elite cavalry would appear at any time. One was to slowly exhaust their strength through war, and the other was to be directly exterminated. Choosing one of the two, as long as one was not a fool, they would know what to do. He shook his head. General Gray, there is no need to say any more. Even so, we are still a Mongol tribe. General, you surrendered to the Han and became a captive in the hands of the two-legged sheep. I'm sure you feel good. He actually started to counterattack. Gray was not angry, but laughed. What he was afraid of was that he would not say anything. If that was the case, it would be very difficult to persuade the other party. But as long as the other party was willing to speak, he would have a chance. Therefore, he was not angry. Instead, he said in a mocking tone, "Two-legged sheep? So many years have passed, and you still think this way. Don't you know that things are changing at any time? The weak in your eyes has grown to the point where we have to look up to them. Does anyone know? Look up to them? General Gray, were you defeated by the Han and scared out of your wits? Isn't that a bit biased?" He did not believe it instinctively. In his opinion, this was only because Gray was now a member of the Han army, so it was not surprising that he would speak up for them. You want to say that it's unfair? Huh. Gray laughed self-mockingly. Then, he said with a bitter expression, "That's right. I used to think the same as you, but there are some things that you will never know how strong your opponent is if you don't experience it yourself. The Han army in front of us has firearms that no one can resist. Their cannons can fire from several kilometers away, or even tens of kilometers away. They are all exploding bullets, and one shot can blow up a large area. Their firearms are not only accurate, but they are also very powerful from a long distance. They can easily penetrate thick armor, and even strong horses are as fragile as thin paper under their muzzles. Let me ask you, who can stop such an army? Who can compare to them? Or do you think that the warriors of your tribe are invulnerable? Or that they are like cats and have 9 lives? Even if they have 9 lives, they will only die a little later. They will still not be able to charge in front of the Han army. How could one defeat such an army that could take one's life from a long distance away and not give one a chance to fight head-on? How can you defeat them? Gray asked several questions in succession, leaving he speechless. He did not know how to answer. They had seen firearms before. The White Russian army mainly used firearms. If not, how could they be a match for the Mongol army, which had the best warhorses and the most skilled horsemanship? However, the power of their firearms was limited. Although they also had explosive bullets, the range was very short, only about 1 mile. What they really used the most were solid bullets. Although it was a little difficult to dodge that thing, it was not undefeatable. As long as they avoided the enemy's bullets, when they rushed to the front of the enemy's formation, it would be time for them to kill. The White Russian army also had firearms that could pose a threat to them at close range. However, those firearms needed a long time to reload every time they were fired. Naturally, they were not very useful against the Mongol cavalry. Chapter 1445. Even so, the Mongol army had to pay a huge price in order to obtain victory against the White Russian army. Furthermore, this method of fighting where both sides suffered heavy losses caused the Mongol cavalry to feel fear and headache. Now, Gray was saying that the Han army's firearms were far more powerful than the White Russian army's. Furthermore, from the looks of it, their firepower was not just 1 or 2 times greater. Bullets with a range of a few kilometers and muskets that could continuously take a person's life. If they really had these things, it would be normal for the Mongol army to lose. His expression kept changing. Gray knew that the other party had taken his words to heart. Striking while the iron was hot, he continued to speak. It's precisely because of the might of the Han army's firearms that this general was defeated in their hands. Xinjiang Sarai city was captured in less than a day. Now, the Han army has set their sights on New Sarai city. It's laughable that Mahama, who doesn't know the difference between them and the Han army, wants to fight to the death. However, they don't know that the final battle will happen, but they will definitely be the ones to die. The Han army will definitely win. No matter how many tribes come this time, they won't be a match for the Han army. They will just be increasing their casualties. Isn't this a little exaggerated? His tone carried a trace of doubt as he listened to this description that did not seem to be true. No, not only is this not exaggerated, it's not enough. There are some things that you will only know if you personally experience it. Gray sighed. At this moment, he was truly worried for the future of Mongolia. Faced with such powerful firearms, he could not see any possibility of the Mongol army winning. This final battle might end with the Mongol army suffering a great loss. If that was the case, would the Mongol army still have a future? If that's the case, we are indeed not a match for them. However, even if we can't win, we can still escape. He understood Gray. Although he was greedy, he was not a person who did not know how to lie. Thus, he chose to believe Gray. However, he did not think that surrendering to the Han army was the only way to survive. Escape? Where are you running to? I forgot to tell you that the Han army this time is different from the Han army in the past. Facing their enemies, not only will they not show any mercy, they will even build a city here to replace the ruler and become the new master of this place. At that time, any forces and tribes that oppose them will have to face a cruel blow. Rather than surrendering at that time and becoming a pariah, it is better to surrender to them now. At least they will still be loyal to them. They can even raise some conditions and enjoy a lot of benefits. Gray's words had completely shocked he. In fact, Gray's words were even more shocking than Gray's words about how powerful the firearms were. In the land of Wuxia, there had been many wise monarchs and great figures. However, there were very few people who truly made the Mongols afraid, and none of them were afraid to the bone. The reason for this was that the Han people did not care about their territory and would often leave after winning a battle. This piece of land would eventually belong to them. Just based on this point alone, once the Mongols were strong, they would definitely set their sights on the Han. On the other hand, he wasn't afraid that the other party would do anything to him. This was also the biggest reason why the Mongols had been able to survive until today. If it wasn't for that, they would have been annihilated countless times already. But now, Gray had actually said that the Han people were going to build a city here and build an army here. Wasn't that equivalent to occupying their final resting place? If that was the case, how could they survive? Could it be that the heavens wanted them to die? His expression became extremely ugly. He finally understood why the prideful Gray would surrender to the Han people. Yes, when the Han people were not only strong, but they also wanted to occupy their territory and not leave, that kind of deterrence would truly make people feel fear from the depths of their bones. After being shocked for a long time, he finally opened his mouth and asked, "Our land is so barren. Other than the fur of animals, there is nothing else that can catch their eye. If they build a city here and station an army here, where will all the expenses come from? I don't think the Han people will be able to sustain this kind of loss-making business for long." The reason why the previous dynasties had only defeated the Mongols and not occupied their land was because this place was simply too barren. Apart from spending money and manpower, there were no benefits to occupying this place. But now, the Han army actually wanted to occupy this place for a long time. Did they not consider this point? No. We were all wrong. The Han people have already found a lot of iron ore nearby. I heard that once those things are shipped out, they can be sold for a lot of money. Pitiful people like us who are ignorant. We actually did not know that we were guarding a treasure mountain. Now, it is all going to benefit the Han people. With this income, they can stay here and not leave. Gray shook his head. How could he not have thought of the same idea? But when he heard that the Han people had opened up the mountain to mine, this idea had completely disappeared. With a plop, he fell back into his chair. This time, he finally understood that the Han army had thought of everything. This way, the nightmare of the Mongols was about to arrive. No. It could not be said that it was a nightmare. The Han people needed people to mine, right? This way, wouldn't it be an opportunity for them? If they lived a herding life, they could survive when the years were good, but it was not a long-term plan. If they could help the Han people mine and earn money, who would say that this was not a good thing? However, if they wanted to get a share of the profits, they had to make the Han people believe in them and leave a good impression on them. When he thought of this, when he looked at Gray, there was no longer ridicule in his eyes, only admiration. It turned out that there were people who thought even further than him. Even so, it was time for him to make a choice. He did not immediately give an answer. He tried to bargain for a while. Gray understood his meaning and shook his head. Don't try to be smart. I am not a Han person. It is useless for you to talk to me. They will not talk to you either. If you want to fight for a future for yourself, you can only gamble. If you win, you can obtain benefits after helping the Han army. If you lose, don't think about it anymore. Of course, you can also choose to continue walking with Mahama and walk towards destruction together. As soon as he said this, he shut his mouth. Although this answer made him unhappy, he also knew that the situation was stronger than the person. As a weakling, how could he have the chance to negotiate with the strong? As for whether he wanted to gamble or not, of course he wanted to. He did not want to continue working for Mahama. He had long hated this method of weakening the strength of his tribe. It was just that he did not have a better way in the past, so he could only endure it. Now that Mahama could not even protect himself, he naturally had to lead his tribe to independence. Okay, I'll do it with you. In the end, he made a firm choice. Gray chuckled upon hearing that. Not bad. You've made a decision that your descendants will be proud of. Trust me. That's right. After he heard this, he revealed a simple and honest smile and laughed. However, there was something that made him even happier. Gray took out a banknote with a face value of 5,000 silver and handed it over to he had never seen banknotes before, let alone Xianxia banknotes. His face was filled with paste. What is this piece of paper used for? Is it a token? It's not a keepsake, but it's very useful. This piece of paper represents 5,000 taels of silver, which can be used to buy a lot of cows and sheep. Of course, believe me, after seeing the prosperity of the Han people, you definitely won't use this money to buy sheep. Gray laughed heartily. He had seen the refined salt, iron pots, sugar, and all kinds of good things that he had never heard of before brought by the 5-star army. This was especially true for down jackets. It was much better than the leather clothes that they sewed themselves. Furthermore, these things could only be bought with the special silver of the Xianxia. This time, Yang Chendong had given him these banknotes, so that the surrendered Mongol tribes could share their wealth after witnessing the prosperity of the Mongol tribes. Of course, 5,000 silver wasn't a small amount. However, to an entire tribe, it wasn't enough. Yang Chendong didn't want to satisfy everyone. Did they want good things? It was simple. They just wanted to work for Xianxia. Talents would have expectations and expectations. In this way, not only would they not oppose Xianxia, they would also speak up for him. Over time, Xia's position in the tribe became more and more stable. He didn't know about this. After hearing that it was money, he carefully put it away. However, he still doubtfully said, "How can there be anything better than cattle and sheep in this world? General Gray, don't joke around." Gray didn't have any intention of arguing with him. He believed that facts spoke louder than words. When the time came, he would be slapped in the face. He led his tribe to join Xianxia. Gray then told him what to pay attention to and what to do next. After that, he went to the other tribes. Just convincing the tribe wasn't enough. Gray had a lot of work to do. Furthermore, in New Sarai, Mahama didn't know that there were people who had started to oppose him and betray him. He was currently sending people to contact the Ross Duchy. There was no such thing as eternal friends, only eternal benefits. In the face of a great enemy, Mahama felt immense pressure. He finally listened to the advice of his subordinates and bowed his head to the Ross Duchy. He wanted to contact them to face the Han army together. The Han army's strongest weapon was firearms. This was the weakness of the Golden Horde. Fortunately, the White Russian army was built on firearms. If the two of them could work together, their chances of victory would be much higher. Whether this land belonged to the Ross Duchy or the Golden Horde, it could be discussed. However, it couldn't fall into the hands of an outsider like the Han army. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.